The village of Melbury, with its winding cobblestone streets and fields that stretched golden beneath the summer sun, was supposed to be the place where Matthew and I would build our dream life together. We had moved into a charming stone cottage at the edge of the village, surrounded by wild roses and ancient oak trees. It should have been a fresh start, a quiet bliss away from the noise of the world. But Sophie was a noise that refused to fade. I met her properly at our housewarming party. She arrived wearing a dress that clung a little too tightly, her perfume arriving seconds before she did. She breezed through the door, laughing, her arm instantly finding Matthew's, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Reyhana, is it?" she had said, her smile sharp and assessing, her tone just a little too sweet. "Matthew has told me so much about you." The way she said it made it sound almost like an accusation. From that night, the pattern began. Every gathering, every dinner, every casual meet-up, Sophie was there. Not just there, but between us, an invisible thread always pulling Matthew's attention away from me. At first, I convinced myself I was overreacting. I was the newcomer, the outsider to their years of friendship. It was only natural they had a bond one could not yet understand. So I laughed when they laughed, nodded along when they reminisced about old memories I had no part in, and told myself that love was patient, and love was kind. But patience has its limits. One chilly evening in late October, I hosted a small bonfire in our garden. The neighbors came, bringing trays of pies and bottles of cider. Children chased each other through the long grass, their laughter lighting up the dusk. I watched Matthew by the fire pit, holding court with his easy charm, Sophie at his side, her laughter rising above the rest. I handed out mugs of hot chocolate, smiling through the ache in my chest. When I approached Matthew, he barely noticed me. Sophie, however, caught my eye with a smirk that said she knew exactly what she was doing. Later, as the fire burned low and guests trickled away into the night, Sophie stayed behind. She perched herself on our worn leather sofa, legs tucked beneath her, chatting with Matthew as if she lived there too. I busied myself clearing plates, the clatter of china the only protest I dared make. It was nearly midnight when I finally said, "It's getting late, Sophie." My voice was light, but the message was clear. "Oh, is it?" she said, blinking innocently. "We were just catching up. You do not mind, do you, Reyhana?" Before I could answer, Matthew laughed and said, "Come on, love. Let us not be rude." Rude. That word struck harder than any argument could. I was the one being rude, for wanting my husband's attention, for wanting my home back. When Sophie finally left, she hugged Matthew tightly, whispering something that made him chuckle. I stood at the doorway, arms crossed, feeling like a stranger in my own home. That night, lying in bed, Matthew snored softly beside me. I stared at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. This was my life now, and it was slowly slipping through my fingers. I turned onto my side, facing away from him, my mind racing. I knew then that Sophie was not just an inconvenience. She was a threat. And if I did not do something soon, I would lose everything I had fought so hard to build. But I had no idea yet just how deep Sophie's roots went, or how much worse things were about to become. The next few weeks passed like a slow, inevitable landslide. Nothing dramatic enough to shout about, but everything shifting, crumbling, little by little. Matthew grew more distant. At first, it was easy to blame it on work. He was a solicitor, and the end of the year was always hectic for him. Long hours, late nights at the office, urgent phone calls during dinner. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself we were strong enough. But it was not just work. It was Sophie. It was the way his face lit up when he read a text message and tried to hide it. The way he turned his phone face down on the table whenever it buzzed. The way he laughed, that rare, boyish laugh I used to love, and then brushed it off when I asked what was so funny. One rainy Thursday evening, I decided to surprise him. I cooked his favorite meal, roast lamb with mint sauce, and lit candles around the house. I even wore the blue dress he once said made my eyes look like the sea. The clock ticked on. 8 o'clock. 9. 9:30. I sat on the sofa, the food growing cold on the table, the candles burning low. When Matthew finally stumbled through the door, smelling of rain and something sweeter, something floral, he looked surprised to see me still awake. "I am sorry, love," he said, shrugging off his coat. "Last-minute drinks with a client. You know how it is." I nodded, forcing a smile. I knew exactly how it was. Later, as I cleaned up alone, I found a lipstick stain on the collar of his shirt. Pale pink. I held the fabric between my fingers, heart pounding, bile rising in my throat. I could not sleep that night. I lay awake listening to the storm rage outside, wondering when exactly I had lost him, or if I ever truly had him at all. The next morning, bleary-eyed and aching, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth. Not guesses, not suspicions. Cold, undeniable truth. I began watching. Not openly. I was careful, cautious. I noted when Matthew left the house, when he returned, when he was glued to his phone, smiling at private jokes I was no longer part of. I checked receipts he discarded carelessly, noting restaurants we had never visited together. And then, 2 weeks later, I saw it. A simple moment. A tiny crack that exposed everything. I was walking home from the village shop, carrying a bag of groceries, when I saw them. Across the street, beneath the awning of the old bookshop. Matthew and Sophie. She was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in a way no friend should. And Matthew, my Matthew, looked at her the way he used to look at me. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The drizzle, the sound of cars passing, even my own breathing, everything slowed, sharpened. I stood there, rooted to the spot, groceries digging into my hands, the truth pressing down on me like a weight I could not lift. They did not see me. Or maybe they did and did not care. I turned and walked away, the cold seeping into my bones, my heart cracking with each step. That night, I sat alone by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. I felt hollow, stripped bare. But beneath the hurt, something else was growing. Something sharper. Stronger. I would not confront him yet. I would not scream, or cry, or beg. No, I would wait. Watch. Plan. Because if Matthew and Sophie thought they could break me so easily, they had another thing coming. And soon, they would find out exactly what I was capable of. In the days that followed, I perfected the art of pretending. Pretending I was fine. Pretending I did not see the way Matthew's smiles never quite reached his eyes anymore. Pretending I believed his excuses, the endless meetings, the working dinners, the overnight trips to network with clients. But inside, I was anything but fine. I was a storm contained in a fragile glass. A breath away from shattering. I needed proof. Real proof. The kind no one could argue with. So I turned to someone I never thought I would, my old childhood friend, Oliver. He worked as a private investigator now, and after one tearful call and a hurried meeting in the back of the village cafe, he agreed to help. "I will be discreet, Reyhana," he promised, his hand warm on mine. "You will have what you need." And so the surveillance began. Photographs. Videos. Times. Locations. Oliver moved silently, unseen, capturing the truth piece by devastating piece. He caught Matthew and Sophie dining together at a French restaurant in the next town, their heads bowed close, hands brushing in the dim light. He captured them leaving a boutique hotel arm in arm, laughing, Sophie's scarf tangled in Matthew's fingers. Each image felt like a knife to my chest. Yet at the same time, each one hardened me. I no longer cried. Instead, I felt a cold, Clear determination settle over me like a second skin. They thought they were clever, sneaking around in the next town over, thinking no one would notice. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated me. While they built their house of lies, I was quietly preparing to tear it down, brick by deceitful brick. One evening, as rain lashed the windows and the fire crackled in the hearth, I sat with a glass of wine, reviewing the evidence Oliver had gathered. Each photo was a blow, but I did not look away. I made notes, highlighted dates, patterns. I noticed how Matthew lied to me with such ease. How he kissed me goodbye while planning to meet her. How he smiled across the breakfast table, already thinking about their secret world where I did not exist. Betrayal was a cruel teacher, but I was learning fast. I realized it was not enough to confront them. That would only create drama, a few tears, hollow apologies. No. I wanted them to feel what I had felt, the shock, the humiliation, the helplessness. And so a plan began to form, dark and sharp in my mind, blooming like a poisonous flower. I would let Matthew think he had gotten away with it. I would let him believe I was still the foolish, devoted wife. Meanwhile, I would work in silence. Building my case. Setting my stage. Because when the moment came, it would not be private. It would not be quiet. It would be spectacular. And they would never see it coming. Weeks passed, each day heavier than the last, but I remained composed. I smiled when necessary, laughed at Matthew's hollow jokes, played the role of the unsuspecting wife with such precision that even I almost believed it sometimes. But behind the scenes, every piece was moving exactly where I needed it to. The anniversary of Matthew's parents' vow renewal was approaching, a grand affair held every 5 years at their sprawling country estate in the Cotswolds. It would be filled with family, old friends, business associates, everyone who mattered to Matthew's world. The perfect stage. I knew Matthew would never miss it. Nor would Sophie, who had become more daring now, more careless, no longer bothering to hide the way she lingered too long in Matthew's presence at gatherings. This was my chance. I sent out invitations in our name, beautifully embossed, written in elegant script, inviting our friends and family to celebrate a special announcement at the vow renewal party. Matthew, ever distracted by his secret life, did not even question it when I mentioned the idea casually one evening over dinner. He simply nodded, his mind clearly elsewhere, and murmured, "Whatever you think, darling." Darling. The word was a bitter echo of what we had once been. Meanwhile, I worked with Oliver to prepare the final part of my plan. Hidden among the decorations would be a discreet projector, carefully rigged to display the images and videos Oliver had gathered. At the peak of the evening, when all eyes would be on the happy couple reaffirming their vows, a very different kind of truth would fill the room. It would be devastating. Humiliating. It would be justice. The night before the party, I stood alone in our bedroom, staring at the dress I had chosen for the occasion, a sleek, emerald green gown that made my eyes look sharper, my figure more powerful. A warrior's dress, not a victim's. I thought about everything that had led me here. The broken promises. The late nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done wrong. The endless lies, the whispered phone calls, the hollow kisses. I thought about the girl I used to be, so trusting, so eager to please. She was gone. In her place stood someone far stronger. Someone who understood that love without respect was nothing but a slow death. And I would no longer participate in my own destruction. I slipped into the dress, feeling it mold to my skin like armor. I pinned up my hair, painted my lips a bold, ruthless red. I was ready. Tomorrow, the truth would not just come out. It would explode. And when the dust settled, Matthew and Sophie would have no place left to hide. The morning of the vow renewal arrived cloaked in a strange, electric stillness. The Cotswolds estate buzzed with preparations. White marquees stretched across the manicured lawns, strings of fairy lights shimmered in the hedgerows, and inside the main hall, florists hurried about, weaving blooms into towering centerpieces. I walked through the flurry of activity as if in a dream, my heels clicking against the polished stone floors, every step measured, every smile practiced. Matthew barely glanced at me when I entered the dressing room where he was adjusting his cufflinks. "You look stunning, Reyhana," he said absently, before returning to his reflection, tugging at the perfect angle of his bow tie. There was no warmth behind the words. No realization of what was coming. Good. By noon, guests had begun to arrive. The estate filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm hum of conversation. Women in flowing dresses and men in tailored suits floated across the gardens, admiring the roses and sipping champagne. I kept an eye on Sophie. She arrived fashionably late, draped in a silk dress that clung to her curves, her hand possessively brushing Matthew's arm more often than necessary. She looked around, smug, confident. She had no idea. The ceremony itself was beautiful, almost painfully so. Matthew's parents stood beneath a floral arch, reaffirming their love, tears shining in their eyes as they exchanged vows again. For a moment, even I was swept up in the tenderness of it all. But then, as the applause echoed across the courtyard, I caught Oliver's nod from across the room. It was time. I excused myself politely, slipping away towards the control panel hidden discreetly behind a curtain at the back of the hall. My hands trembled slightly, but not with fear. With anticipation. With triumph. I pressed the button. At first, there was confusion. The music stuttered to a halt, the fairy lights flickered, and then, across the enormous white wall behind the floral arch, the first image appeared. A grainy video clip of Matthew and Sophie. In a hotel corridor. Their bodies tangled together in a desperate, stolen embrace. Gasps filled the air. Glasses slipped from stunned hands. I watched from the shadows as faces turned towards Matthew and Sophie, confusion first, then horror, then disgust. Matthew stood frozen, his complexion draining of color. Sophie clutched his arm, trying to pull him towards the exit, but it was too late. The next video rolled. Another hotel room. Another night. Another betrayal. People began whispering loudly, some openly pointing, others already pulling away from Matthew, from Sophie. Matthew's parents looked devastated, their expressions crumbling as the reality of what they were witnessing sank in. The third video was the worst. It showed them not only together but laughing, mocking, making jokes at my expense. At the life I had shared with Matthew. It was unbearable and yet, satisfying. I stepped forward, into the center of the stunned crowd. There was a sharp intake of breath as people turned to look at me, standing proud and unflinching in my emerald dress. I let the silence stretch for a long moment before I spoke. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice ringing clear and strong through the hall. "It seems there are some truths that needed to be seen, especially today." And with that, I turned, my heart pounding but my steps sure, and walked away from the ruins of my old life. Towards something new. Something better. Matthew called after me once, his voice cracking. But I did not look back. Not once. The estate slowly emptied as the sun dipped lower, washing the gardens in hues of gold and melancholy. Inside, shattered remnants of the day clung to the air, half-drunk glasses of champagne, abandoned shoes, whispered scandals weaving through the corridors. I stood alone by the grand stone fountain at the center of the courtyard. The cool mist from the water kissed my skin, grounding me in the present. For the first time in years, I breathed without weight pressing on my chest. Behind me, the heavy oak doors creaked open. I knew without turning that it was Oliver. "You all right?" His voice was soft, careful. I nodded, though I was not entirely sure what all right even meant anymore. He stepped closer, the crunch of gravel under his shoes sharp in the silence. "I think," he said, after a moment, "you just changed your whole life in a single afternoon." I gave a small, broken laugh. I did, didn't I? The realization settled over me like a second skin. I was no longer Matthew's wife. No longer the woman who smiled through betrayals, who excused loneliness with lies. I was Reyhana. Whole. Alive. Oliver extended a hand, not touching, just offering. We should get you away from here, he said. Fresh start. I hesitated. Leaving the estate, leaving the memories, it felt like shedding my old self completely. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. I glanced once back at the grand house, the sweeping lawns, the history carved into every stone. It had been a prison dressed as a palace. Without another word, I took Oliver's hand. He led me to his car, a sleek black saloon parked discreetly under the weeping willows. As we drove away, the estate grew smaller in the rearview mirror, until finally it vanished behind the hills. I leaned my head against the window, letting the rhythm of the road soothe me. We did not speak much on the drive. There was no need. The Cotswolds blurred past, rolling hills and ancient forests giving way to quieter villages, then to an inn tucked away on the edge of a sleepy town. It was charming, with ivy climbing the stone walls and warm light spilling from the windows. Safe. Unassuming. Perfect. Oliver carried my small suitcase inside while I checked in under my maiden name, a detail that made something inside me swell with bittersweet pride. The room was modest but cozy, with a fireplace already lit, casting a welcoming glow over the quilted bedspread. Once the door closed behind us, I allowed myself a moment to simply exist. No expectations. No obligations. Just breath and heartbeats and the unfamiliar sensation of freedom. Oliver placed the suitcase down gently. I'll leave you to rest, he said, voice low. I caught his hand before he could retreat. Stay. One word, one plea, spoken without shame. He hesitated, searching my face for signs of doubt, then nodded once. We sat by the fire, two broken people stitched together by circumstance, saying nothing because there was nothing left to explain. The crackle of the flames filled the room. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to close my eyes and imagine a future. A real one. Not built on promises never kept. Not marred by betrayal. But one crafted with slow, deliberate hope. I fell asleep that night with the fire warming my skin and the comforting weight of Oliver's presence nearby, guarding the fragile pieces of my new beginning. Outside, the stars blinked awake in the ink-black sky, bearing silent witness to my quiet, fierce rebirth. Morning crept in quietly, weaving pale gold across the small room. I woke to the soft crackle of the dying fire and the unfamiliar, comforting weight of hope draped across my heart. For a moment, I simply lay still, cocooned in warmth, allowing myself to savor the fragile calm. Oliver was already up, seated by the window, scribbling something into a battered leather notebook. The early sunlight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the distant frown of concentration as his pen scratched across the page. It struck me then how little I truly knew about him. About his dreams. About the burdens he carried so silently. But somehow, I trusted him more than I had ever trusted Matthew. Perhaps pain recognizes pain. Perhaps freedom binds stronger than promises. He looked up, sensing my gaze, and smiled, a real one, small but honest. Morning, he said, voice rough from sleep. Morning, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I rose, stretching, feeling each muscle unfurl like a flower waking from a long winter. The inn was silent save for the occasional creak of old wood and the distant calls of birds outside. It felt like the world had paused just for us, offering a pocket of peace before life rushed back in. Over a simple breakfast of scones and tea, Oliver told me his plan. There was a cottage not far from the village, tucked away behind a wild tangle of rose bushes and ancient oaks. An old woman he once helped had left it to him in her will, he explained, but he had never found the courage to move in. It needs work, he said, stirring his tea absent-mindedly. But it's quiet. It's untouched. Untouched. The word bloomed inside me. I wanted that. A life untouched by betrayal. Untouched by expectations. Will you come see it? He asked, eyes searching mine. I did not hesitate. Yes. We left the inn with a few essentials packed into Oliver's car. The drive was short, but my heart pounded as if I were crossing a great ocean. When we turned onto a narrow dirt path, canopied by trees, I held my breath. The cottage appeared like a dream. Stone walls weathered by centuries, a heavy wooden door half hidden behind a riot of wildflowers, windows framed by ivy. It was beautiful in its imperfection, raw and stubborn against the passage of time. It felt alive. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching underfoot, and approached the door. Oliver produced a heavy iron key and unlocked it with a satisfying click. Inside, the cottage smelled of old wood and lavender. Dust motes danced in the slants of sunlight that pierced through the windows. The fireplace was cold but inviting, the furniture sparse but sturdy. It was not grand. It was not polished. It was perfect. I ran my fingers over the rough stone of the fireplace, feeling its history hum beneath my fingertips. I want to stay, I said, surprising even myself with the firmness of my voice. Oliver smiled, that same small, honest smile. Then stay, he said. We can fix it up. Together. Together. The word hung in the air, tender and terrifying. I did not know what tomorrow would bring. I did not know if I would ever fully trust again, or if the wounds Matthew had left would ever truly heal. But I knew this. I had a chance. A beginning. A life that belonged to me. And maybe, just maybe, someone to build it with. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant promise of something new. I closed my eyes and listened. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to believe in tomorrow. The days that followed blurred into one another, a peaceful rhythm of mending the old cottage and tending to the garden that had grown wild and defiant. Each sunrise greeted us with 1,000 small tasks, and each sunset closed our hands around the quiet satisfaction of work well done. It was not a perfect life. But it was ours. Oliver and I shared laughter that felt unpracticed, raw and real, as we fixed broken windows and scrubbed soot from the stone walls. There were moments, brief, almost shy, where his hand brushed mine, or our eyes met across the room, and something tender and unspoken passed between us. I was healing. Not in grand, sweeping ways. But in small, almost invisible stitches that bound the torn pieces of me back together. And yet, deep inside, a shadow lingered. A tether I had not yet cut. Matthew. His name no longer twisted my heart with longing. Instead, it burned cold, a scar of betrayal that still itched beneath the surface. I had not seen him since the night of the gala. Rumors reached the village like whispers on the wind. His business had crumbled, creditors were circling like vultures, and Clarissa had vanished without a trace. Justice, some might have said. But I felt no triumph. Only a heavy, aching sadness for the life I once imagined, a life built on illusions. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Oliver found me sitting on the stone steps outside the cottage, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. "You are thinking about him," he said softly, sitting beside me. I nodded, staring out at the fields bathed in twilight. "I need to see him," I whispered. "Not for him. For me." Oliver said nothing, only reached out and placed his hand lightly over mine. A silent promise that whatever happened, I would not face it alone. The town square felt different now. Smaller. Tainted by memories. I found Matthew exactly where I expected, hunched on the steps of what used to be his prized law office, his suit wrinkled, his face unshaven, a hollow man clinging to the wreckage of his pride. He looked up as I approached, disbelief flashing across his features. "Reyhana," he rasped, his voice hoarse. I stood tall, the cool evening air wrapping around me like a shield. "I came to say goodbye," I said, my voice steady. He stumbled to his feet, desperation bleeding into his eyes. "Please, we can fix this." I was wrong. I was stupid. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." The words meant nothing now. They fluttered uselessly in the space between us. "You never wanted me," I said quietly. "You wanted a version of me that would fit into your world. Your success. Your image." He reached for me, but I stepped back, the final line drawn between us. "I am not angry anymore," I continued. "I am not here to punish you. I am here to free myself." Tears welled in his eyes, but they were too late. Too hollow. "I hope you find peace, Matthew," I said, meaning every word. And then I turned away, the weight of 1,000 yesterdays lifting from my shoulders. As I walked back towards the cottage, towards Oliver, towards the life I was rebuilding with my own hands, the stars began to prick the velvet sky above. Each step was a farewell. Each breath, a beginning. When I reached the garden gate, Oliver was waiting. He opened his arms without a word, and I stepped into them, feeling the earth tilt beneath me as the past finally let me go. There, under the vast, forgiving sky, I chose myself. I chose the messy, beautiful, imperfect life that was mine to build. And for the first time, truly, I was free.